Together we can mobilize a global mission force to finish the task. This is your tribe.
Greetings from Taiwan, Taipei, and also to whoever is listening to our podcast. This is your tribe interview right now. My name is Ray. On behalf of Global Mobilization Network, and today we have our special guest, Nigel Paul. I would just let him to introduce himself, and let's listen to his amazing story and the ministry of MoveIn. Nigel?
Wonderful. Thank you, Ray. It's wonderful to be here on this podcast. It's such a, as I looked through the different podcasts of This Is Our Tribe with GMN, I really connected. You are my people. So thank you so much for inviting me to join you today. And so I guess you asked me to introduce myself, so I'll give you the quick version of how I arrived on this planet. So about 120 years ago, my great-great-grandfather sailed with his young family, to Southern Africa. And became missionaries. They, a legacy that continued with them, and then their children, which are my grandparents, and then their children, which are my parents. And then I was born in Zambia in 1981. And so obviously there was a lot there. And I don't believe anyone is self-made. I know I'm not. The Lord puts things in our lives, puts us on a path. And, my grandfather translated the whole Bible into Bemba, which is the main language in Zambia.
Wow.
In a thatched hut in a remote part of Zambia over about 19 years. Apparently, he didn't even know how to type with his full hands. He used two fingers, apparently. And
like this.
Apparently, that's what my father said. And so, he translated the whole Bible, and to this day, the Bible that he worked on and a couple of other people worked on is possibly the most read Bible in Zambia today.
Still is today. Wow.
Yeah, that's right. It's called the Bible, and it's a very very widely read Bible there. So all that to say, I was born into this, and so I grew up in Zambia and kind of ping-ponging back and forth between Zambia, the Toronto area, and Canada. Canada's my passport country.
Okay.
And then we had an interesting detour, a Holy Spirit detour, to Pakistan for 4 years.
Oh, the whole family.
The whole family, and it's a big family because I'm the fourth of 5 children. So by this point, all 5 of us had been born, and so I went to Murray Christian School, a boarding school in Pakistan, for grades 1 through 4. And then we returned to Canada for a few years, returned to Zambia. I was on the waiting list for a year and a bit for Rift Valley Academy, another boarding school in Kenya, and then went there in 97 until I graduated in 99. And then I went back to Canada and went to the University of Waterloo, which is kind of, it's, for lack of a better way of saying it, it's kind of like the MIT of Canada. Someone might say that. I don't know if it's that prestigious. Probably not, but it's a great university. And I did a degree in internet business back all the way back in the year,
before the millennial.
So I graduated with a degree in internet business through a department called Independent Studies back in 2003. And my whole life, I've been an entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur. I joke that my first failure was in grade 1 or so when I tried to sell toothbrushes made of tree roots to my classmates. And then my first success was selling gravel. Yes, the gravel on roads in little sandwich bags to those same classmates. And this time they went for it. So that was my first success. And of course, there's a lot of humor there. But I continued throughout my life. And to this day, I'm wired as a serial business entrepreneur. And I actually do run a side business.
Oh, you did?
However, yeah, I do. I oversee a business with about 20 to 25 staff. Again, it's only now these days it's only about 5% of my time, because the main thing I do, which of course I'll talk about the most in this podcast, is leading the global movement called MoveIn. But just to mention, yeah, that side business, we provide virtual assistants, executive assistants, administrative assistants, and also bookkeepers and digital marketing specialists.
Wow.
And I do that also because I love entrepreneurship, and that entrepreneurial wiring God used, I believe, to to start a mission called MoveIn. So yeah, I'll talk more about that. But after I graduated in 2003, I spent just 4 months, but they were life-changing months, on the Logos 2 ship.
All right.
With OM. And Ray, you were an OM ship. What's the word? You were a dualoid. You were on the other bigger ship, the oldest ocean-going ship in the world, or passenger, certainly the oldest floating bookstore in the world.
Yeah.
So I was on the Logos 2 in the Caribbean for 4 months, and it was amazing. It just was so thrilling to be on mission with people from all over the world, living in close community.
Yeah.
Sailing between ports, receiving thousands of people.
Yeah.
Every day. And what inspired me most was just how rich mission community can be.
Yeah.
And also how, while we are serving, while we are, meeting needs in the world, we can grow so much. And so to look around me at my, mostly 20s, I think mostly 20s was the age of people on the ship, to see them growing by leaps and bounds spiritually, I just thought, wow, this is so amazing. It's such a win-win-win, where needs are being met, people are growing spiritually. And so I returned to Canada, and people got tired of me talking about the ship, because I said everybody should go to the ship or something like it. And I still feel that way. I still feel that we should all, find our place in the world and in what God's doing in the world, to realize that there are exciting, radical things we can be part of, that God wants to use us, and that we will grow as well. And so
Amen.
I became a mobilizer. I think I knew I was a mobilizer, but I was an unofficial, and I was an unofficial mobilizer for, many mission agencies. In fact, I was asked by one mission agency, Frontiers, for example, to speak for them because they couldn't do it. And then I, of course, was mobilizing for OM, and I was mobilizing for, SIM, OMF, AIM, and other lesser known mission agencies. And so then I did something my dad had suggested a few years before. So my dad actually had also been on OM for a year and a half in the 60s. So pretty early on after OM started. And he was in India in those early, amazing, crazy years.
I know.
sleeping on train platforms and, sleeping on the ground most nights. And it was amazing for him. It was challenging. And another thing that happened was he got to know George Verwer, the founder of OM. And George is famous for keeping in touch with people.
Yeah.
And he kept in touch with my dad. So sadly, my dad passed away about eight years ago. But George was, a faithful friend to him for 40 years, more than 40 years. And so when I was 18, today I'm 41, a couple of years younger than you, Ray, though, you arguably look younger than me, but that's another topic. When I was about 18, my dad suggested I apply or, reach out to George to see if I could possibly be his gopher, his traveling assistant, which he had had for 40 plus years every year.
Yeah, I know.
And yeah, go ahead.
I got to know some of them, and it was funny that you always had to carry a lot of books for him.
Yeah,
He always telling me, "This is a life-changing book," and you always had to blow the globe.
That's right.
To carry like.
That's right. I have a replica. I have a replica that I use when I speak to this day. So yeah, so when I was 18, my dad suggested I, look into that. Took me a few years. So I was about 24 when I finally, and it was after my ship experience, when I finally emailed George with trembling fingers because it was scary to, to do this. Where could this lead? And so George said, meet me in Montreal, a few hours away from Toronto. He would be speaking at a mission conference there later that year. That was, I believe, 2004. And we had a chat. It was a short chat. He barely asked me anything about my qualifications. He was more interested in my family, in my parents and my siblings, just someone who cares so much, right, about people. And then he said, yes, I think it would be great to have you as my gopher. And we picked 2006 as the start date. So there would be another one in between there. And yeah, so in August 2006, I embarked on this year with George Verwer. And it, again, was a life-changing year. To carry, you said it well, to carry his bags, to carry books, and to blow up his globe in 300 meetings in 20 countries on 6 continents.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, and even Oceania or Australia. So, no one ever makes it to Antarctica, right? A few of us make it there. I haven't made it yet. It keeps travelers humble, right? Because they can't say they've been to all the continents. But so in that 1 year, 300 meetings, 20 countries, 6 continents, and it was such an incredible year to just give exposure to me, to the world church, to the world, to different amazing people.
Yeah.
And so after that year, not long after that year, I asked God, so where do you want me to go? And he led me back to Toronto to move into the most Muslim neighborhood in Toronto, and possibly the most Muslim neighborhood in all of North America. To join a friend named Dave, who had moved in there a few years before intentionally, and others, and somebody else joined and led a new small ministry. And so I joined that, and it was another exciting time. It was akin to my time on the ship, to be on mission, doing exciting things. And so it's during that time. Well, let me back up, and this will relate to those listening more than almost anyone. As we mobilize, we find there are certain things that demobilize people. And what I had found, and I think what probably most of us find, is that support raising which I'm all for. You know, when God calls us to do that, I do it. I help my staff do it. I'll talk more about that later. But it can be such a demobilizer, and if the only way to join global missions is by quitting your job, raising support full time, being full time, and crossing the ocean, if that's the only way, then maybe only about 1 in 1,000 people will do that. And so when I was an unofficial mobilizer, I was trying to get people to do that, and I had a measure of success. I had a few people do that. That was exciting. But of course, most people didn't do that. Most people wouldn't do that. And so all these years I said, Lord, is there a way to mobilize the other 999? And so that was always in the back of my mind. And the other thing, and Ray, you probably experienced this on the ship. You see people grow by leaps and bounds the moment they step onto the ship. But then they return to their home country. And so often, and to just let me first just celebrate, they take so many things with them. They have this powerful new experience, new vision, new friendships, relationships, and it informs the rest of their lives. And they might, they'll probably be much more active locally when they return. They'll probably join the missions team on their church to, resource. And at the same time, the ship and other things like it can be a bit of a bubble, right? So when you leave that bubble, you get hit with things, and you get hit with discouragements, and people may not care that much about your amazing experience, and you probably won't have the rich community that you had on the ship. And so what I observed in my friends, as they left the ship, and most of them were on it for 2 years. So again, I was an anomaly, only on it for 4 months. But I like to keep in touch with people as well. And so I tracked with them, and then I watched them return home. And what I observed was that, they had taken 5 steps forward on the ship. And when they returned home, most of them took about 3 steps back. Some of them took 4 steps back. And so I also asked the Lord, how can new mission opportunities or new pathways or new ways to be in global missions, how can they be less of a bubble? And again, praise the Lord for those amazing hotbeds that, are also bubbles. But how can we have more things where there's less of a huge change when you leave it? And in fact, couldn't there be something that you don't leave that is your new life with, and so, okay, so I'm giving you a bit of a suspense for things here. So I'm in this intensely unreached neighborhood in Toronto. In 1 square kilometer, there is a school for the people in that 1 square kilometer. You know how many kindergarten classes there were for that 1 square kilometer in one school? 24 kindergarten classes.
Why is that?
Because of the density and how young these families were in this most Muslim neighborhood in Toronto, right? So just think of that incredible, immigration and migration and diaspora, right? And so I moved into that neighborhood, and it was there that so many things came together, where the Lord gave me a new vision. And you can probably guess, if you can sum it up in 2 words, you can probably guess what those 2 words are. Any guess, Ray?
Move in.
That's right. Move in. You got it. You got 100% on that pop quiz. So the Lord gave me this vision for Move In, and what it is it's a message to young people and not so young people, but focusing on young people around the world to say this: hey, your peers are, on a path to move into the nicest neighborhood they can afford, most of them, because that's what people do. That's what everybody naturally does.
Mm.
But what if you did the opposite? What if you moved in to the toughest neighborhood you could find, the lowest income neighborhood you could find, the poorest neighborhood you could find, the most unreached neighborhood you could find? So just to change our thinking, change our defaults, um, and to say, what if you moved into a neighborhood that most people would never dream of moving into? And so that was part of it. And there are three words that came together. The first one is unreached, and by that we mean unreached people groups. Okay. Second word is urban. Something happened just a few years ago, I believe it was around 2005, where the world became more urban than non-urban for the first time, possibly ever, I believe, and certainly in the last few decades, if not centuries. So urban, let's go where the people are going. That also helps with tent making, and I'll speak a bit more about that in a moment. And then the last word is poor. So MoveIn is a bit unique because, most evangelical missions, and I certainly relate to this, are focused on unreached people groups. And that was my first passion as well, and remains a core passion. But the Lord also revealed to me the need of the poor around the world. So, there are 4 billion people in the world who are poor, who have not broken into the middle class. And 2 billion of them are severely poor. And 1 billion of them are extremely poor or life-threateningly poor, where an untreated toothache could end their life, where a simple disease could end their life, where that same disease could certainly end the life of their child. And so there are 1 billion people in the world who are life-threateningly poor, just extremely poor. They're called the extreme poor. And there are also about 1 billion people, and there's obviously a big overlap between these two groups, who live in slums. So about 1 billion people live in slums. And so, to fast forward, the Lord really put this new burden in my heart. And, I think it's not a natural strength of evangelical missions. And actually, Ray, you're unique because you worked for World Vision. And so I'm sure the Lord gave you a heart for the poor. And it's not a drum that we beat typically in the evangelical community, but I think it should be. In Galatians, the Apostle Paul and Peter and a lineup of pillar apostles said, we agreed the very thing we should do is remember the poor. And, Jesus said he came to preach good news to the poor. In Matthew 5:3, he said, blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. There's just so many incredible scriptures. Of course, one of them is, he who was rich, Christ, became poor so that we through his poverty could become rich. And so in MoveIn, we have these three words: unreached, urban, poor. And what we do is we identify neighborhoods and we call them patches, because neighborhoods can be sprawling areas. And so we define these very defined areas called patches. And in MoveIn, to qualify for MoveIn, they must have unreached people groups. They must be urban and high in density. and they must be poor or very poor. And so back in, so MoveIn officially began in 2009. And I was meeting with people, officially January 2009. Of course, there's a pre-story to everything, but I was meeting with people one at a time for coffee or for lunch and saying, hey, would you consider moving into one of these neighborhoods? And it was very similar to similar conversations I'd had before, which is, hey, would you consider going to this amazing place called the Ship, right? Or another amazing thing. And it was the same process, except remember that prayer I prayed, Lord, give us more for the other 999. And so this time I could say, keep being the university student that you are, or keep pursuing the IT career that you're pursuing, or the law or architecture or social work or police or whatever career you're nursing, teach, whatever you're pursuing, keep doing that, but move in to one of these neighborhoods. And so this message began to resonate. And of course, by the way, of course, that didn't require support raising, right? So that primary de-mobiliser was removed. And that was a game changer. That was an absolute game changer, because the number of people who responded, who would do this, dramatically increased from those who were willing to quit their job, raise support, and go into full-time cross-cultural missions. And so, I was meeting people one at a time, and it really began to resonate. People began to move in. And then I thought, I'm sharing this vision with one person at a time. Let me share it with a group of people. And I think I was initially thinking 30 or 40 people, and so I picked a date strategically 12 weeks out. And I just began to pound the pavement, to spread the vision, to do guerrilla marketing. And when this event happened 12 weeks later, Ray, you know how many people showed up? 600 people came. And, again,
in Toronto.
Yes, that's right, in Toronto. And again, I'd initially been thinking 30 or 40, right? So 600 people came. This vision was resonating, and God was doing something. It was a 24-hour conference. And I had never organized an event of any significance before. And it was what I joked today. It was Holy Spirit chaos. But the Lord was in it. And, that first night was an exciting night, Friday night. And I said to those there, tomorrow is for those of you who are seriously considering doing this. So if that isn't you, then tomorrow isn't for you. But if it is, then come back tomorrow. And the next day, about 100 or 120 people came back, and we interviewed every single one of them. And I had asked 20 people, trusted people, to interview every single person. We presented simultaneously 25 different patches in the gym of the church where this event was. And then after lunch we fanned out across the city, and we prayer walked through different patches within driving distance. And when people came back, I handed them a piece of paper and I said, circle yes or no. And there were some words to describe why. But essentially it was no means, you know what, I don't think this is for me. And yes was, I commit to pray weekly about moving in until God calls me to move in or not. And about 40 or somewhere in that range circled yes. And we, to end the conference, we surrounded them in that same church gym, and we prayed for them and commissioned them. And then the conference ended. And I often look back to that moment, when the conference ended and everybody left the building, and it was so quiet in the auditorium that you could hear a pin drop. And I realized then and realize now that, it was entirely in God's hands. And,
Mm.
God would decide what would happen. And
Mm.
encouragingly and amazingly, over the course of that summer, many of those people, those yes people, did move in to different patches. And by the end of 2009, that first year, we had about 8 teams, about 40 people, and it was beginning to spread to more cities. It spread to a city an hour and a half
Wow.
from Toronto. And so it continued to spread. The next year, the movement doubled to about 15 teams and about 80 people. And by this point, it was spreading around the world. So it spread to Germany. An OM team in Germany heard about it and became an OM move-in team. And it began to spread across Canada. It began to spread into the US. It spread into Oxford, England, and Bradford and London, England, across Germany over the coming years. And so in 2010, it was about 15 teams, 2012, about 25 teams, and
Mm.
about, the following year, 35. Today, it's a movement of almost 400 people on 85 teams in 45 cities and 16 countries. So God has really worked. We have,
Mm.
again, almost 400 people. And, God has answered that prayer. And we hope that this is still just the beginning, because our vision is to see thousands of regular Christians prayerfully moving in among the unreached urban poor globally. And we have seen possibly hundreds of people come to Christ. Just my team, we've seen about 20 people come to Christ, from Iranian Muslim and Japanese Buddhist and
Mm.
Israeli Muslim and generationally poor Canadian, many different backgrounds.
Mm.
And as a movement today, we estimate that we recognize about 85,000 people in our patches, and we know the names of, we estimate, about 22,000 people. We know the names of about 22,000 people in our neighborhoods. And we are tent makers. Some of us are staff, and I guess I'm also a tent maker because I run that business.
Mm.
My wife is a nurse. I am also full-time, giving leadership to moving globally, to the staff team. So every movement needs a staff team. And that was a paradox for us, because some of these tent makers would need to step out in faith and to raise support, right? To be that person that raises support to support the movement. And so most of our movement are don't raise support. They're tent makers, self-supporting, again, in so many professions. But we do have that powerful staff team that we call it the vision team.
Mm.
And that the vision team mobilizes, spreads the vision, supports the movement, organizes resources and Bibles and conferences and events. And I believe every movement needs those people. And so, yeah, God has done this incredible thing. And today we are in Canada, the US, Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Brazil, Venezuela, Colombia, Chile, Portugal, England, Sweden, Germany, Albania, France, Philippines, and Indonesia. I think I got all the countries there. And God is working. And let me also say, because I think this is something
Wow.
everyone can relate to, that the pandemic really hit us. I'm not sure it didn't hit anybody. It really hit us as a movement, and it tested us, and it arrested some things.
Mm.
Um, it has been a tough time. But I zoom out and realize it's been a tough time for almost everyone.
Mm.
My favorite word for what the pandemic has been to us is a headwind. So if you think of a ship sailing in the ocean, um, sometimes a wind comes, an adverse wind can come, and it really slows you down. And the pandemic has done that for us. It's been a trying, testing time. But I also want to encourage everybody and say, headwinds will come, storms will come, and those are testing times. But you know what else will come? Warm breezes will return. The wind at our back will return. And, we have the privilege, and yes, it's painful, but we have the privilege of persevering through those hard times. And when we do that, we have the privilege of being there and of having persevered when that warm breeze comes again. And when those, more easily flourishing times return. And so, and also God will work in ways he wouldn't otherwise work in those testing and trying times. He'll refine, the Bible says God disciplines those he loves. And when he has tested us, we will come forth as gold, to use an old translation. God refines and he tests and he disciplines. So just to encourage anyone listening, it's been a trying time, and but we are excited for the present and for the future, and we're committed to that vision to see thousands. And Ray, I mentioned we have almost 400 people in the movement. Like OM and like most missions, we have shorter term a shorter term reality, and we celebrate that. On the one hand, somebody might say, wouldn't you like everybody to just stay moved in? And actually, I don't think that's God's plan. I think he wants us sometimes to have stops on the journey. He has different plans for people. He wants some people to go and start a new mission, a new ministry. He wants people to do all kinds of things. And so we have that privilege in MoveIn as well, of having people join for a couple of years. And we estimate that the average person is moved into one of these patches in MoveIn for about 3 years. So not too dissimilar from OM and other mission agencies. And then we have those people that remain, and of course they're critical. So we now have, MoveIn is now 13 years old. So I've been moved in for 13 years. We have had several move-inners who've been moved in for 13, 12, 11, 10 years, 7 years, whatever. And so over the 13 years, we're currently almost 400, but over the 13 years, we've mobilized about 1,100 people. And so, that first 1,000, because before the movement even began, God gave us that vision to see thousands. So we've mobilized our first 1,000. And we're excited to mobilize thousands more. So so that kind of gives you the overview of things. And Ray, everyone loves a romance story. So if you want, I can also share that story. So my own story there.
Thank you, Nigel. I think this is amazing. I'm just listening to you and how they start to, have a very humble beginning. It's just between you and a few other guys, and move into a neighborhood and to catch the vision and see the needs of the urban pool and also the unreached people groups within your neighborhood. There are a lot we need to unfold here. Just by listening to you, I have a lot of questions, but I don't even think
go for it.
I don't even think we have enough time for this. But guess what? This is a podcast, so we can do whatever we want.
That's right. That's right.
Let me just ask you a few questions before we come to a conclusion, or to let you go. Number one is, we after such a journey like orange shift or sort of mission trip to somewhere, and a lot of people have life-changing stories. A lot of people get to see the kingdom of, is bigger than you think. You got to see.
That's right.
The church is more diverse than you think.
That's right.
and then you catch the fire and you return to your own context, your so-called the daily life or your church setting or whatever. So either you have a hard time to, we call it re-entry, or you become very passionate and sometimes very cynical about the environment and you want to be a game changer, you want to do something about it. But that is, like your case, having an idea of or having a vision of MoveIn to the degree that you actually want to start a ministry from scratch and recruiting people to join you, and the rest of the rest was history. But how that's some degree of commitment. It's not just saying, oh, I have a dream and let's do it together, and just just encourage some of your close friends and let's give it a try and we will see how it goes, maybe 6 months, and rent a house and let's try to move in and we'll see how it goes from there. And but you host a conference and with hundreds of people and trying to do that and sustain. Even I believe for the very first group of move-iners, I don't think it's all flowers and rainbows. It's not easy. It was relatively easier to get people to be excited about something or even join your team, but to ask them or they have the ownership to sustain, to stay back, that's difficult. That's different. So let me hear from that side of the story. Is that all right?
Ray, that's really encouraging to hear you say that, because most people don't think of it from that angle. You know what? I'll start with a bit of humor. So when I was with George Verwer, he would joke and say, I don't know why anyone would want to be a Christian leader. Right? And of course, he's been a Christian leader himself for 70 years now.
Yeah.
And I didn't quite know what he meant. I knew there were hard things, but I wanted to be a Christian leader. Of course I wanted to be a Christian leader. But now I really know what he means. And, yes, with humor, but being a Christian leader is carrying a cross, so to speak, because you don't do it for the money. And you certainly shouldn't do it for the money, right? So you're not getting rewarded. You aren't getting primarily rewarded financially, like most hard jobs, many hard jobs will do. In fact, you're probably taking a huge pay cut, and you're probably experiencing a lot more. And you're experiencing a lot of hardship. People are gonna hurt you. People are gonna, say things to you that they wouldn't say to their secular boss. That is very hurtful. You're gonna see church conflict. You're going to see terrible things. And so, persevering through that, for all of us, for all those listening, I just want to thank you for persevering and encourage you, because in doing this, we're just, trying to imitate our Lord, right? Who persevered farther than any of us ever will, which was to the cross, and where the Lord, in the triune God, is gracious with us, right? Gracious with us, loving the world despite such sin in the world. And so it's an opportunity for us to to imitate Christ. And it's very humbling. It's very painful. And there's a balance in there of Sabbath and taking vacations and doing things that fill our tank. That's critical, because it's another story. Maybe we'll need to do another podcast sometime, Ray. But I had a nervous breakdown. I went through burnout. I got driven into the pavement. In 2012, I reached the bottom. And I didn't even know what was going on. And now I have words for it, which is I went through a nervous breakdown, which is the old-fashioned way of saying burnout, but it's a great term. And I clawed my way back out. I've also wrestled, Ray, my whole life with depression. So, you know, God has allowed me to have this thorn in the flesh where I've said for some time now that I'm always potentially just hours away from pretty severe depression. So I've battled that as well. And you know, when my wife Jessie and I got married, we had a huge financial debt, and that was just a couple of years after I had started MoveIn, and that was really scary. How are we going to pay off this debt? And let me fast forward and just say, the Lord, you know, I have a small salary, and that's the way I want it to be. But through, you know, different things, you know, Jessie working before we had kids really long hours as a nurse, and us doing a couple of things on the side, you know, by God's grace, we've wiped out that whole debt, and God's even really blessed us abundantly. But I just share these things because those listening can probably relate to almost all of these things of hardship and people hurting you and going through, you know, maybe burnout and depression and financial worry, anxiety and hardship and debt and whatever. And, you know, so Ray, thanks for asking that unique question. But to finish, wow, what a huge privilege to help redirect or to help give an opportunity to more than 1,000 people. You know, as I said, the average person has moved in for 3 years. So that 1,100 people times 3 years, Ray, is how many years? 30. It is 33. Am I getting this right? 30,000. Actually, no.
30,000.
3,300 years of somebody's life mobilized to be living among the unreached urban poor. 3,300 years. You know, and so let me just remember that I'm one person, and what a privilege it is for me to be used by God in any way to help one person, let alone, you know, tens of thousands of people who've been reached by a MoveInner. So so that's one question. And Ray, you're probably right. We do need to probably have another podcast because there's so much I want to ask you as well.
I think this is great. I think the reason I'm saying there is a lot to unfold is because I think, number one, this ministry is so-called unorthodox. It's not the traditional way of doing things in the mission world. That's number one. Let's be very honest. You know, back in the days, probably the second Lausanne Congress in Manila, and we are already talking about from everywhere to everywhere. You know, the whole church, the whole gospel, that kind of idea. But we never really, you know, get a chance to see how they can be done. You know, like literally from everywhere to everywhere. Every gateway city is probably a receiving end, but also a sending base.
Yeah.
But most often people are thinking about, you know, sending people overseas as the most practical way of doing things. Number two is the the practical side of it, the mechanism of how it can be done, in entrepreneurship, how people can actually, I believe there must be a lot of surveys coming to place, how we measure like where to go and strategically thinking. That's a business talk. But often evangelicals, we don't talk about business, and we think that's not spiritual. We think you just pray and probably just go and prayer walk. But there are a lot of practical things need to consider. Living standard. How poor is poor. Will that jeopardize your livelihood? If you're going alone, that's probably fine because you're just yourself. How about if you're moving with your whole family, and are you? Your family safety is probably the most important thing for all, and all these things are very practical, very, it's not easy. I can say that it's not easy. And number three, I think if we have another episode on this, is how you manage to work with so many different people and with so much diversity. In different continents, different time zones. And by the way, you are not paying any of these people.
That's right.
Either they're raising their own support, or they are like tent makers. And basically you don't really have a job description for how you're going to work in different contexts, because these are all different. I believe the Philippine poor, or the Latin America urban situation is definitely different. You have different approach, and how you live your life as a family in that neighborhood, it's going to be different. So I don't think we have time for this, but just to wrap it out here, I just want to show my appreciation to you guys as well, because I've been observing and listening to your stories, and just like what I said earlier, is we also pray for the MoveIn movement. But at the time, I thought so much. We thought it was just a movement in Canada or North America, but a few years later, you're now almost everywhere. So
it spread.
Bring us home, Nigel. It's all yours now.
All right. Well, maybe I should end with that. Maybe I should end with that romance story, because that'll get people's attention. And you know what? I want to end with this story because it's a microcosm of MoveIn. It's a picture of MoveIn in one story. So at that conference was a beautiful young woman in the front row. And despite the hundreds of people there and the Holy Spirit chaos of that conference, I really noticed her. And after the conference, to borrow a phrase from George Verwer, I zoomed in on the target. And that's how he tells his romance story. And you know what? At first, I was rebuffed by this beautiful young woman whose name was Jessie. But eventually, she agreed to a relationship. And so after starting MoveIn, I moved into a new Bangladeshi neighborhood where I'm sitting right now in that same neighborhood now, almost 13 years later. And I moved in. I started a 12-bed discipleship center for young men. We crammed 12 beds into a 3-bed apartment.
Oh, wow.
I was single, and I wanted to mentor younger men and even my peers, where we were together in discipleship. So I lived in this apartment, and Jessie moved into the young women's apartment in the building next door. And one day I said to Jessie, so we were getting to know each other and wondering if we might get married. And one day I said to Jessie, before proposing, I said, Jessie, what if we got married in this neighborhood? So Ray, you've already spoken to the kinds of neighborhoods we live in. We live in higher crime, lower income neighborhoods. And by the way, just as an aside, we've had very little trouble with crime, amazingly, over these 13 years. Almost almost no incidents. God has really protected us. But you know, it was scary. So I said to Jessie, "What if we got neighborhood in this? What if we got married in this neighborhood?" And she got really excited because it was the most concrete description of a wedding that I'd ever posed her, because I hadn't proposed yet. But then the fear swept in, and she thought, "This is a crazy idea. You know, what about the rival gangs? What about, you know, potential crime? What about rain? There's no indoor place for this, you know." And the biggest barrier was, well, there were a couple others. Could we get permission to get married on private property? And the biggest barrier was the train that goes by every 2 minutes, loudly, so loudly that you can't hear each other speak. So is
Wow.
this, you know, and there's a garbage dump and there's garbage, you know, is this where you get married? And again, it's not the natural idea. It's not the natural place to get married. But Jessie took it to the Lord. I encouraged her to take it to the Lord and ask the Lord about it. And the Lord showed her Luke 14, which talks about when you throw a banquet. It says, don't invite the rich because they will repay you, but invite the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame, those who
Wow.
will not repay you, and your reward will be in heaven. And
Wow.
so Jessie took this and said, okay,
Crazy
yes,
that you guys actually took it like literally.
yeah, yeah. And we tried to, and the Lord gave Jessie peace. And, you know, and I also said to Jessie, and those listening, many of you are mobilizers, so you'll relate to this. There's always something to stop you from doing something radical. There's always going to be something that you can say, I would do it except for that. But we have to give that one thing to God. And for us, that biggest thing was the train, right? And so we just proceeded. We proceeded to have this wedding, and we got more and more, we desired more and more creativity. And so, you know, there's one area that where we could possibly have a wedding, but it wasn't big enough for the many people we wanted to invite. So we decided to have 2 weddings in one day. And I mean full weddings, hour-long ceremony, 3-hour reception with dinner, twice, right? Twice. And so we had our morning wedding. Well, before I get to that, you know, did we get permission? Well, we called the property manager, and he said, "I've never had a request for a wedding on any of my properties, and no, you cannot get married on my property." So, you know, our family was already booking their flights, like we had no plan B, and we just prayed. We prayed with faith, and we kept calling. And one day that same powerful figure said, and it was actually Jesse on the phone this day. It was usually me calling, but this time it was Jesse. And he said, "I don't know why I'm letting you do this, but yes, you can get married on my property. And you can name your first child Princess after my company, Princess Management." And so we joked today that no, we did not name our first child Princess. And we're glad our first child was a boy so that we didn't have to name him Princess. And so, yeah, so we proceeded with the wedding. We had lots of hurdles and obstacles. There was a postal strike which interfered with sending out our invitations, but we just persevered. And so the day of the wedding came, and there were, you know, and such an incredible turnout. As many as 500 people came to the morning wedding, and it was just a beautiful, wonderful time. It was a sunny, beautiful day. It didn't rain. It was one of the best days of the year. We had a beautiful setup. We didn't have much money to work with, but we made it beautiful by God's grace. We even asked all of the neighbors in the 25-story high-rise buildings to hang big paper flowers over their balconies. And so these huge buildings became beautiful decorations surrounding the wedding site. And so we tell the story that we had our wedding photos between the weddings, and we looked down from the balcony where we had some of our photos, looking out on the wedding site. and it was almost time for the second wedding, and we got really discouraged. You know why, Ray? Because there was almost no one there. And we thought, oh no, what were we thinking? This is so embarrassing. I guess everyone came to the first wedding, and we were really discouraged. It was minutes away from the second wedding. We got down on our knees. Jesse was wearing a white sari, and I was wearing a black kind of Aladdin like outfit.
Yeah,
And
I saw that on the video. Yeah.
yeah. And we got down on our knees and we prayed and we said, Lord, you did an amazing thing this morning. Do what you will. This in the second wedding, we give it to you. And we postponed the second wedding about 30 minutes. And when Jesse walked down the aisle the second time, Ray, there were more people than at the first wedding. And over the course of the second wedding, there were as many as 700 people. So over the course of the day, as many as 1,200 people participated in our wedding. And it was an incredible time. We shared the gospel. We shared our stories to our hundreds of neighbors, many of them Muslims. Hundreds of Muslim beloved friends came, and Hindu people and Buddhist and people from all over the world. And we had incredible worship music in different languages. We had dancing. We had, to end the day, we had, as the sun set, and it was late, you know, this is high summer, so the sun set around 10 p.m. We had flashing lights and beautiful music and, you know, incredible production. Somebody had donated of the stage and lighting and sound. And it had just been an incredible day. And to end the story, Ray, remember that one thing that was going to stop us? And we gave it to God?
Yeah, the train.
It was the train, right? But you don't want to hear what happened about that, right?
No, yeah,
maybe
what happened?
Maybe we should end the podcast and leave everyone in suspense. What do you think? All right, no, I'll tell you what happened. So on the day of the wedding, Ray, my wife's aunt, who is not a Christian, said, "Did you call the city of Toronto?" And this is one of the bigger cities in the world, 7 million people in the greater Toronto area. And we said, no, of course, we didn't try to call the city of Toronto. Why are you asking? And she was referring to how on the day of the wedding, a little bit down the track, there was construction on the day of our wedding that caused the trains to slow down as they passed our wedding site. God had orchestrated that. God slowed down the trains that went by every 2 minutes. And it was incredible. So I just want to encourage everybody and say, let's keep believing. And, I want to preach that message to myself because maybe as we get older, as we have families, Ray, you alluded to it, as we have kids, we want to protect them. But let us keep dreaming and let us keep having faith and let us keep trusting God and stepping out in faith and believing God will do amazing things. So I hope that encourages everyone. And again, that's kind of a small picture of what MoveIn is, that we can move into these neighborhoods and we can trust God for amazing things. So thank you so much, Ray, for having me on this podcast. It's been a huge privilege and pleasure.
Thank you, Nigel. I think it's been such a blessing just for the last hour, listening to stories after stories. I think I will conclude with George's book, which was published probably 2 years back, which is called Methodology.
Methodology,
Methodology. It was like, whenever there's one or two believers, there must be a mess or something like that.
Amen. One of my favorite quotes. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, sooner or later there will be a mess.
Yeah, but I remember the phrase after that was, but God still work His way out, and out of all this mess and our shortcomings and our limitations and the environment and discouragement and everything, you can still see signs of hope, signs of
Amen.
Emmanuel, God with us,
Amen.
that kind of signs, and let's keep us
Amen.
going. And yeah, you're right. We need to preach it to ourselves. We need to encourage
Amen.
ourselves, because we are all witness in this great story, and just unfold one chapter to another, and just to be continue amazed. People amaze us, even we don't feel like it, even we feel like this is not a good time, or
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And
thank
God
you.
bless you. And let's continue this journey together.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
And it would be great to listen to you again. Thank you very much for everyone who is with us until this end. Bye.
Thank you
Have
so
a good
much.
one.
Thank you, Ray, and everybody.